So we got to talk about this other thing that we've been watching.
Boy.
So I don't know if you guys heard about the show called Adolescence on Netflix. Wow. But I got to give credit to Natalia's dad.
Yeah.
So Marco was like, hey, you guys got to watch this show.
You never call him Marco.
Pie, Marco, Dad, Marco. You know.
Who's Marco?
Well, I don't know. They may be like, who's Pie?
I know.
That's Portuguese for dad.
Yeah.
And
that's what you call
father-in-law's
him.
name is Marco.
Yeah.
So anyway, so he's like, check this show out. And I'm like, okay, when I have time. Which that's the other funny thing is, back in my single days as a young airman back in like 2007, I remember having a staff sergeant supervisor who's married with young kids, probably about the same age as mine. And I'm like going to the movie theater all the time, single, like no responsibilities, living life. And I was asking, hey boss, have you seen this movie? Have you seen this movie? And he's like, no, dude, like I don't go to movies. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what's wrong with you? It's so boring. And then he's like,
you just wait, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, dude, like I'm lucky to even finish a movie or a series at home, like with kids. He's like, you just don't understand. I was like, whatever, man. And like, bro, for real, like today, it's like
real life.
We don't go to movies like super often at all. So like it's a rare opportunity to go, see King of Kings or something like that, which is awesome. But then even at home, it's like, man, there's so many like series have started, that like I just haven't finished. And it's like, you know what? I'm okay with that though. Yeah. Like I don't need to my life doesn't revolve around media
or we
TV.
start and then usually I fall asleep and then you get frustrated and you try to wake me up and yeah.
And then you're like, hey, what happened? And I'm like, gotta go watch it. Yeah. So anyway, all that to say, like, we don't always get to, watch the show, but this was one of those where you got 4 episodes. They're each an hour each.
Yeah.
And so we started watching it together. You fell asleep like the second-ish, third episode. I just binge watched the whole thing till like 1 in the morning. Yeah. Which is, I'm a night owl. So
which that also happened because, just a side note, that also, you were able to do that because you also had the day off.
Work.
Because usually around that time you would have been at work.
I'll be at work. Well, So anyway, this show, Adolescence. Talk to me about this show.
Oof. There's so much to talk about that show. Like we watched it before, like Friday, I think. Saturday, something like that.
I guess so.
So like 4 days ago, I guess, however long that was. And like throughout the day, there's still like things that I'm like processing from this show. Yeah. And I've heard mixed reviews, and I think part of it is because either people aren't in that stage of life, with kids, or really think that, the main point or whatever for the show really matters. But for us, it did really impact us.
Yeah.
And
so real quick, not to interrupt. If you haven't seen the show,
yes,
stop the video.
Yes.
Go watch the show.
Go watch the show.
If you've seen it, just keep playing because we're going to go and unpack and talk about it.
Yeah. So there's a lot. So it, it's like 4 chapters pretty much, and it follows this the story of this 13-year-old boy who is accused, right?
They're accused of murdering peer classmate.
Yeah, peer. And it takes place in
the UK.
In the UK, which obviously a little bit different, laws when it comes to I guess murder and stuff because they don't have guns there. They have knives, but it's still murder is murder.
Which is the first interesting thing about the show is like, you don't even have to get into the gun law debate because we're not even in America. Right. This is in the UK.
Right.
And, the murder weapon is a knife in this case. And there's 2 trains of thought. One is, hey, the UK is a really safe place. Really the only guns, because also this is speaking from us living over there for like 2.5 years. Yep. The only people that really own guns there are typically hunters that have usually like shotguns and things like that. So it's very rare.
And some police officers, not all police officers.
Yeah, exactly. And so guns are a lot harder to get a hold of in the UK, and it's not like people just have handguns.
Right.
Can criminals still get them? Absolutely. Right. Are they going to get them if they want them? Sure. But goes to show too as well, the other train of thought is like, this classmate used a butcher knife or from the kitchen knife. So it's like people that want to do bad things, people want to commit crime, not to get super deep into politics, but the reality is like bad people are going to do bad things,
Right.
and they're going to find opportunities to do it, regardless of the laws that are in place. But back to what you're saying, it was interesting. There was in the UK. We did see a lot of things that we're like, man, that's so UK.
We did see a lot of that.
There's like the busybody lady that's on the corner of the house that's always like peeking over the top of the thing. And
The
like,
neighbor.
You know, and it's like, we had fantastic neighbors.
We did.
That wasn't our neighbor per se, but man, we did know that is kind of a cultural thing
common.
over there.
Yeah.
The neighborhood watch is alive and well. But
that's funny.
so it was nostalgic.
Yeah, it was. We saw a lot of things that we were like, oh, you know, our neighborhood kind of looked, or our village looked like that a little bit, or, you know.
So do you want to just go like kind of episode by episode?
I think that would be good.
Unpack it. So so the first thing stuck out to me was the first one. So the whole first episode, obviously, if you watched it though, and again, don't get mad. We already said spoiler alert. So the whole first episode is the investigation, right? And so it was interesting to me, being a member of the law enforcement community, to see how they portrayed the investigative process. And, you know, based on my training experience, everything seemed to check out and line up. You know, it's tough, you know, when you're, you know, executing your search warrant on a house, and you know, when there's kids involved, that's like a whole nother level that you're dealing with. And so obviously that's the case they had there. And so it's like, well, you know, do we need the guns pointed at the kids? You know, do we hit the house too hard? You know, is this kid really a threat? He's in his bed, he's asleep. You know, there's all different
out there.
Trains of thought with that. I mean, officer safety is important, and then you don't know like what else has happened here, and you know what else is in the home. You know, what's the father or mother going to do? You need to get in there, assess situation, and then get out. But it was that was interesting to me, that from some of the few investigations I've been a part of, some of the few search warrants I've been a part of, it was interesting to see that. And then when it came to booking in the jail as well, that was almost even more close to home, because I was a corrections officer, as you remember, for, you know,
oh yes, I remember.
for half a year. And I decided, hey, this is not my foot in the door to law enforcement I thought it was going to be. So it was a very is a time of growth, and a very interesting time. And
scary time, because I never knew if you were going to come home.
And kind of a dark and dirty time in a way, just because it's depressing in the penal system and the jail system. And so I was working county corrections, you know, so we're not talking like hard criminals, but we did have murders in there that I'm dealing with.
Criminals.
And we did have some juveniles in there as well. And it's
and you did have families in there too.
Yeah, separated, of course. But it was interesting to see the booking process go like, dude, I've been there, I've done that, I've seen that. And
it was interesting because like, you followed along. Like, I was watching it, but I was also like kind of hearing you, you know, mumble and stuff. And it was interesting to see you go like step by step. And I used to do that. I used to do that. And then, you know, in the part where like they take them in to see the nurse and the dad's there and they have to, you know, fully search him. That was hard. Obviously it doesn't show on camera because it's a minor, but you know, obviously, you know, it's hard because, you know, that's just part of the process. And, you know, and his father's there watching all of this, you know, happen. And so from the, you know, there's like the law enforcement.
There's nothing comfortable about searching another human being.
Right.
There's just not.
Right.
You know, especially, you know, strip search. Like there's age, whatever, you know, there's nothing comfortable about it. Obviously you're going to have like gender with like gender, you know, female, male.
Right.
But like, you know, and thankfully I've not had to search kids before, but it's like, you know, so it was always a hard scene. And then obviously being a dad and seeing him struggle. And then he's still defensive, right? Because he's like, what is even happening here? And is this even necessary? You know, it is just
and even going back to like the house search as a parent, you know, because my brain doesn't think, you know, doesn't usually think law enforcement, right? Not only, you know, that's not my background, but also the, you know, nurturing side of a mom, right? And so that was hard to watch too, because the mom is kind of like, you know, kind of in shock and going crazy in a sense, and the dad is like protective mode, but also like, I don't want to make this worse, and so what do I do? So from like the parent side of things, that was really hard to watch, because it's a kid.
And that's the, I guess I would say harmful is maybe the right word, but the most disruptive thing about arrest warrant or search warrant is you are disrupting what was considered to be the safety and sanctity and security of a home. You know, in order to remove someone that is being accused of being accused of a crime. And then obviously they're still gonna get their day in court. You know, they're innocent until proven guilty. But like the mom, like she just had a bomb go off in her home, basically. You know, and then
and even the teenage sister too. You know, where she's like, "What?" You know, in the bathroom getting ready to go to school or something, and she's like, "What is happening?" Yeah, that was hard.
But they did. One of the great things about the show is they don't really. It's very well balanced. So they portray the law enforcement side, but it's just pretty much like factual.
Normal.
Like it's not, There's no
ordinary
added bias per se. And then as far as the defendant's side as well and the kid and his family, they're just kind of showing the story as well. And like you feel the emotion on both sides and you feel what's happening, but it's not like they don't leave you with any answers or really sense of direction. They kind of leave it up to the viewers to sort out like, what does all this mean? And I actually really appreciated that I wasn't steered in like a pro law enforcement or like anti-law enforcement and like, you know, what about our rights kind of thing. It was like, no, this is just, this happened. This person's accused. We're going through the process. Here's your defendant. You know, here's your, your defense attorney assigned to you. You know, here's your rights. And then we're going to go through this together. But yeah, so pretty much the first episode.
And it was hard to see too, the scene where, you know, his dad, you know, tells him, you know, look at me when they're already, when he's already booked, you know, they're in the room waiting to talk to, you know, the detective or his representative or something. I can't remember which one, or both of them, I guess. And, you know, they kind of have a moment of just, you know, dad and son. And he's like, you know,
I'm going to ask you this once.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you this once. He's like, tell me the truth. Did you do it?
Yeah.
You know, and
of course the kid emphatically denies it.
Right. Because he is, you know, he is essentially in denial.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of ways to look at that too. You could say one, he's in denial. Two, he's, you know, the reason why it shows his dad to be in the room is because he still looks up to his dad. And like, that's a whole nother podcast conversation for another day. But like the reality is like, he is still looking for that validation and affirmation from his dad.
And protection, honestly.
100% and protection. And so, you know, his dad is that lifeline for him to hang on to in a new world of unknown and fear. Even if he did commit a terribly heinous crime, this is unknown waters for him. And then the realization is starting to sink in. But then the other aspect too is from a denial perspective, you know, a lot of times like you hear him say like, I didn't kill anyone.
Right.
And you have to think too, like psychologically, sometimes, you know, sometimes like a criminal can potentially distance himself psychologically from the crime they committed by saying, well, maybe he or she did die at a certain point, but I didn't kill them because it didn't happen when I was there. And that's a way that like emotionally they can avoid the guilt or part of the guilt by saying, you know, no, I didn't kill anybody.
Yeah.
And that's not only an avoidance tactic, but it's also a way to like kind of conceal a white lie as well. And obviously you didn't want to get found out. And then, you know, you kind of learn as the show goes on, especially in the third episode, like psychologically, there's a lot going on there with this kid.
Yeah, a lot.
So episode 2 is what's happening in episode 2?
Episode 2. So 1, he gets, you know, there's the arrest, he gets booked. He has, you know, a conversation with, you know, his dad in the room. And then episode 2,
school system, right?
Yes, school system. I was trying to think which one. Yeah, school system and his dad kind of trying to figure out like, you know, what's really going on. There is a scene, and I can't remember if it's at the end of episode 1 or at the beginning of episode 2, but where the dad goes back to like the little waiting area with the mom and the daughter and the sister. And the mom is really frustrated as to why he chose his dad over his mom to be in the room with him. And I thought that was interesting because it goes to show that a 13-year-old boy, you know.
Ooh, good point.
You know what I mean? Like you said, you know, the validation, the protection, like He's
not looking for nurturing.
Correct.
At that point.
Yeah.
He's looking for protection, guidance, wisdom, and a shield.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to be nurtured and smothered at that point. And as you learn, he has a lot of issues towards women.
Yeah.
So therefore, why would I bring my mother into that room? You know, I think that's an interesting point. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, that's exactly where I was going. But yeah, so episode 2, the school system.
Yeah.
Woo-wee.
So
that could be another whole episode.
Yeah, for sure.
Episode 2.
You know, so it's again, you got to talk about too the fact that the whole one take concept with the camera was really interesting. And fascinating. Really draws you in.
Yeah. Which, side note, a lot of people, you know, or, you know, there's, you know, the other side of people, oh, this show was just whatever, is that they, you know, what I've seen out there is that they're like, oh, you know, their main idea for the show, you know, and how they're, you know, talking about it was just a one take camera, you know, the one take, you know, recording of it and all, whatever. And that's really what they want people to see and how amazing this was. But if you really sit and, you know, watch it to understand it, and not watch it just to watch another show, there is a message there.
Mm-hmm. But for me too, I think having that format, especially in episode 2 with the school system, really kind of shows you almost the claustrophobia and the busyness and the chaos within that particular school as the camera is following the detective as he goes through the school. And then it pans to the teacher, and then the teacher goes in a room, and then another teacher comes out, and then it pans to them, and then now you're following a student, and so it's kind of like there's so much happening.
Oh yeah.
But then you just sort of see, like, you kind of feel like the anxiety of the teacher's loss of control in a lot of ways. I think.
Yeah.
through part of that, and then especially when like just fire drill. And everybody's outside.
Oh yeah.
It's just yelling, and no one's responding or listening to anything the teachers are, you know, giving the commands.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot there. And obviously, you know, one of the things that really stood out too is, I believe she's the principal, the lady that's kind of carrying, you know, taking the detective.
Definitely leadership position for sure.
Yeah, leadership position in the school, and how she, you know, is just kind of there, but not there. You know, she has zero control over her school. You know, she has zero control over students. And it goes to show that, you know, and she mentioned too that she was a teacher before to the girl that, you know, was, you know, is the you know, victim. And you know, obviously, you know, that she started as a you know, a teacher, and then kind of maybe potentially moved her way up. But yeah, just completely disconnected.
Yeah. And that makes me like feel for teachers today. Like we, you know, from our, from Ohio, you know, we know 2 teachers just offhand, in the school system, junior high and high school.
Yeah.
And then we have more that we know as well.
Oh yeah.
But, you know, this is certainly not a dig at all on teachers, and like they're going to war in the schools on a daily basis almost, you know. And I feel for them in the job they have, because it just seems like uphill battle a lot of times. Because as we were watching that, I'm like, we were having a conversation. Like sometimes we pause and we stop and have a conversation. And it's like, you know, you were kind of like, well, why doesn't she do this or why don't do that? And I'm just like, I don't know that they can. I don't know that they have any authority, because what are you going to do? Like, these kids don't care. Like, oh, you take my cell phone away? Like, come at me, bro. Yeah. Or like, what, you're going to send me home? Great. I'd love to go home.
That's what I want. Yeah.
Or maybe I won't go home because I don't like being at home and I don't feel safe there. I'm going to go to the park or whatever. Like, I don't need to be here. Deuces.
Yeah. I mean,
it's like, what authority do you have in the school system anymore?
Yeah. That's, you know, obviously we're not teachers, and so.
No.
But we do have a lot of people that we know that are in the school system in general. And that is definitely a calling. That is not just, oh, I'm just going to be a teacher, you know. I'm sure there are some out there that are like that, but I know that the majority, especially the ones that I know that are working really hard to make a difference. Yeah, I can't. Yeah, props to them. That is a calling that is definitely up there.
So I think that episode 2 really highlighted some of the internal issues of the school system, and even there was like there was a newly certified teacher that he was talking to, and then he was like,
that was sad.
He was pretty much like, these kids are horrible. What do you expect? What do you expect? What do you want me to do? Like, we can't even teach here.
Yeah.
And so, you know, obviously the stereotype is extreme of a school, but like the reality is, like, how many schools do you know this is like the case?
Yeah, and I mean it goes back to, this, not obviously we're not, bashing on the, schools and teachers and stuff like that.
No.
But there is something going on, right? In
True.
the school systems. That's just a reality that we're living in today.
Yeah.
But also like a lot of not all students are bad either.
No.
And not all students come from broken homes, or not all students come from, whatever, fill in the blank. But there is something going on. And that's the whole point of the show, in a sense, not just about the school. That's just a, part of the journey of
environment.
part of this boy's story, big part.
You said something too about, not every kid is like from a broken home in school, whatever. And that's an interesting point too on the show, which I did really appreciate, is that they didn't hit all the stereotypical red flags of school violence.
Right.
These studies have been done. It's like, oh, he came from a single parent broken home, or abusive father, or absent father, or there's alcohol in the home, or there's instances of divorce, or there's these other things going on. And it's like, none of that ends up being the case with the father.
And they did that on purpose.
Yeah, which is great. And it's like, the reality is like, he actually came from like a
good, loving home.
Loving home. I mean, did the father have some anger management issues that were discussed?
Right.
As, being concerned as parents? And then, hey, what do we pass down to our kids is another question that's raised at the end of the film in episode 4. Of like, did I pass my anger onto him? Like, is that something we should have tried to control better? Like, I didn't pass it on, did I? Like, is that on me? Should I, so.
That's hard.
Those are tough questions as a dad or as a parent that like we wrestle with. But I appreciated that they didn't hit the stereotypes of like, that's red flag, that's red flag.
Yeah.
It's like, this is really kind of a seemingly outside normal kid. What happened? So one other interesting scene that I thought was really interesting, which I think ties back to the name, because I was watching it. I'm always curious, like, okay, where did the title come from? Whatever show I'm watching or movie, like, somewhere it pops up at the movie, or it's just on the nose and obvious. But I think part of the title of Adolescence, and if you go and look at some of the interviews from the directors and the actors, they talk about how adolescence is a very difficult age. Yeah. And obviously developmentally, psychologically, it's huge. But then I think it's also about like fathers and sons too, and about parents and their kids, because like, it's also about the law enforcement officer's relationship with his son as well, who's also in the same school. And there's a scene where the kid like kind of pulls him aside, and they haven't really been talking too much, and the father's been absent because he's been at work all the time, and he's always involved in casework. He's always gone, Yeah. Even the kid kind of ribs him a little bit and hits him with a low blow, and is like, he asks him to lunch, and his son's like, no, you got casework to do, don't you got? And it's like, no, but I'm off right now. Let's do lunch. Yeah. But he pulls him aside and wants to talk to him about something. And of course the dad's like, what? I'm busy. What do you need? What's the deal? What's going on with you? What's the problem with you? And he's like, it's not even about me, Dad. It's about you. You're missing this. And I really like that scene, because it just goes to show as parents, like, what conversations are we not having that we need to start having? What are we not hearing our kids say? Yeah. Whether they're actually saying it, or it's by their body language, or again, what they're not saying, but then it's also like, what are we just missing in communication that's happening around us that we're just clueless on, especially generationally, that we need to get dialed into. He starts talking about the emojis and this 80-20 rule and like all this stuff. And, even from a law enforcement standpoint, his dad is just clueless to that particular part of the investigation. Yeah. And that, we're both millennials, but then you've got, Gen Z, you got Gen Alpha, and it's like a whole other language. And, now there's like this, this closet language that it's like, what does this emoji mean? This emoji mean? And it changes. And it changes with what's trending. Whatever's trending. Yeah. So that was, I think that's important to talk about, and just tune in and be more aware as parents. Yeah. As our kids get older, they're going to pick up stuff in their peer group. Oh yeah. And you're like, well, what does that mean? And then talking about that and saying, hey, we feel like this is appropriate, or maybe this is not appropriate. Yeah. Or let's like, I don't think you really understand the meaning of that that is cool and that's trendy right now. Right. Let's talk about that. Yeah. What else did you think about that scene or episode?
Two. Yeah, no, I mean, just, circling back to all of that. Yeah, I really liked that. I mean, in all these scenes, like, there's something that you can take from it.
Oh, yeah.
And all these scenes for me, like, they were all of it was heavy.
Yeah.
From, the parent side, the school side, I mean, I haven't worked in any, schools. I've worked in a university before, but I know how hard these people try to make schools, what they should be. But like you said, their hands are kind of tied usually. But it was hard to watch the scene with the officer and his son, because you can sense, like, there's just the relation. He's been so far detached from having a relationship with his son, or vice versa, the son with his dad, that you can it's almost like a business, transaction, conversation from, a father and a son, and it's hard. But he receives it, and, obviously he kind of understands, and, I think he also thanks his son for, like, helping the case in a sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, the courtyard where, they break into a fight with the girl that they pull in to, interview and stuff. And that was hard too, because, it's just chaos.
Sure. Well, then that part too is like, she's what's interesting too is, like, the victim, you don't meet her family.
No, not at all.
Which is another point that the show wanted to make, was like, we hear a lot sometimes about maybe the victim, but like, how did we get to, it's not about did he do it, it's about why did he do it. Because you find out in episode 1 he did it because hey, here's the video, hey, this is you on CCTV. And then obviously it's a hard scene with the dad. Yeah. Crushing. Yeah. He turns away from him, like he can't look at him in the eye. Yeah. He feels, betrayed, and like, what did I create? What happened?
That was so hard.
But so like, you don't see the victim's family. You don't get to meet their family, and the only connection that you have with the victim is through this one student at the school that's like your best friend. Yep. And it briefly touches on, like, the support network for that student that's grieving, and for the school. The teachers are walking around frustrated, like, oh, now they're talking, we got to have grief share groups, and now we got to have, and this and that, and we don't have time to teach, and now we got to throw this other stuff in. And it's like, that's facts though. Like, I understand the struggle. I see the struggle. Yeah. But like, she's pulled in by, like, a counselor that obviously she's been working with, and then that kind of disintegrates and falls apart, because she feels like they're just gonna, she says, you're just going to sign me like another shrink. I don't want another shrink. I need another shrink. And, it also speaks to some of the failures of the mental health system, particularly maybe in schools with counseling or whatever, is like, maybe there's not enough adequate resources sometimes. Yeah. Or maybe it's just it's an instant fix. And I think part of this is whether it's the victim and the support care that their group needs. Yeah. Or, the family of the perpetrator, whatever the case is, but like, it's a community effort. And that's one of the things that some of the interviewers talk about, is it takes a village to raise a child. Yeah. It also takes a village to destroy a child. But like, everyone plays a role. Yeah. And especially when you start talking about school violence, it's almost like a triangle. Like, you've got the student resource officer, you have the counselors, but then you have the teachers. It's not just, oh, that's an SRO problem. That's up to law enforcement. Yeah. Or, oh, the teachers need to be doing more. Or how come the counselors aren't doing more? We're all aware and attentive of what's happening. And so it's a triangle of looking out for this, as well as peers. They'll see something, say something. Yeah. And I think school counselors, I think their jobs have gotten way harder. Same with teachers, school leadership and stuff like that, because of what's happening, because of what's trending, because of what, all of that, because of what is out now. I mean, I remember when I was in high school, we had different
counselors for different grades. I don't even remember the counselor for my grade, but I remember the counselor for the grade above me, and he made an incredible impact, I feel, in the entire school.
Yeah.
And I think that nowadays, it's just harder for counselors to be able to be what they were hired to be, a counselor, And so,
but it's not just a one solution.
No.
It's not just, we'll just get you another shrink, another counselor, which, a teacher. Like you're really going to have a really good support system established.
Yeah.
But then it also goes back to just the reality of kids these days and what they're dealing with technology, with phones, with cyberbullying, with, all that. Like in one of my capacities with federal law enforcement, one of the things I got to do was as a NCMEC ambassador, which is National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I was an ambassador to go into schools, high schools, junior high, and talk to students and kids with teachers and counselors in the back, present and available, to talk about cyberbullying, talk about sexting, talk about these tough conversations that need to be happening a little more often.
Not just at school.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that's part of the briefing that we would talk about from a law enforcement capacity is like, look, like you guys may think it's cool and okay to like send each other like nudes and text pictures, but like, hey, by the way, like you're technically arguably trafficking in child pornography by doing this. Like, are you aware of that?
Most of them are not.
And then, hey, also once you send that, like you can't really get that back. And who's to say that, little Timmy shares that with Susie and then, next thing you know, it's all over the school, whatever the case is. And that's when you have like revenge porn and things like that. So, those are sensitive topics that are hard to talk about, but you got to talk about. And it's like, I would go out with my peer law enforcement officer and we'd talk to these kids and, there'd be a lot of snickers and laughs and people have the hoodies up and they'd be tuned out, whatever. But you get some that would be like, oh, wow, like I didn't know that. And, the reality too, is I went through that and talked about it with students, is I realized and recognized that like their world is so much different than mine when I was in high school. Like, there were times like I would get bullied or picked on for things.
Sure.
And I would go home and it'd be like, a crummy day. And, and I would, excuse me, I would, sometimes I'll dread going back to that particular class the next day.
Right.
But like, that's it. Like 3 p.m., 4 p.m., like it's over. I'm going home now to my safe space and my family who loves me. But today it's like, it doesn't leave you.
Nope.
It's in your pocket all the time with your phone, on social media, and it follows you everywhere. So that cyberbullying is
for a long time.
A whole nother level. Yeah.
And that's what people forget. Whatever you put in the internet, you can't, it's there forever.
And then it trends and whatever. And even in that school, like obviously, whether it's in the military, talking about sexual assault prevention, response, and suicide briefings I've given before, you always want to have a provider that's available to say, look, we're talking about tough topics right now. This is serious stuff. Some of you may either been a victim of one of these we're talking about, or you may know someone, and so this may hit home to you.
Yeah.
It's perfectly okay to break away and step outside the room and process or just check out.
Yeah.
And look, there's this individual that's available to talk to you about that. And deal with that. And so we had that in the school as well. And I do remember there were a couple of times where, a teacher would come up to me afterwards, or a counselor would come up to me afterwards, or coach, and like, yeah, we had a girl that dealt with that last year. Or yeah, we have a girl or guy in our classes dealing with that right now. And they were so hungry for it though. It was
the students or the teachers?
Primarily teachers.
The teachers.
Primarily teachers. The kids were curious.
Sure.
Like, what are these two like proverbial cops showing up and talking to us about?
Right.
But like the teachers, they were hungry. Like they wanted more. They came asking us questions, and it was encouraging, but it's also like sad. Like they're not getting the resources that they need, and they're not getting enough, and they're overwhelmed, and they've got kids that are approaching them because they're trusted. And that was something else that I would let the kids know is like the reality is not everyone has a safe environment at home or a trusted adult at home. So therefore, I would make sure that they're aware that like if you are a victim of this or you're going through this, or you receive something that makes you feel uncomfortable, or you sent something that then got out that you didn't intend to get out.
Yeah.
Talk to a trusted adult.
Yeah.
I didn't say parent because unfortunately not everyone has a trusted parent. So trusted adult may mean a coach at school, may mean another kid's parent that you trust and look up to.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality we live in the world. And so that's important to preface. But some of these coaches that obviously are trusted by a lot of these kids, they would get kids come talk to them. And they
Yeah,
would like,
that's good.
what do I do with this?
Yeah, yeah,
So it was very, I guess, rewarding because
yeah,
I knew my time there was valued
yeah.
and valuable. But again, going back to the show, it's just like, it's a hard environment to work in. And there's so much going on inside these schools. It's tough.
And people can argue too and say, oh, well, that's just, the worst, of public schools. But the show is actually, in a, you could say proper school in the UK,
Proper school, yeah.
And so it's not, the lower end of public school system here.
No,
It's like,
People probably pay good money. It could be a private school.
it
maybe.
could be, yeah, it could be. Or it could be, I mean, most schools there, they use uniform anyway,
Yeah,
which is
true.
fun. But yeah, so yeah, interesting.
Yeah, school system. So then, episode 3. Boy, that one was nuts. So episode 3 was probably one of my favorite episodes because I'm watching this and I'm very interested in psychology and looking at maybe going back to school for more of that. But like watching this child psychology interview, I was about to get on my phone and Google this lady because I was
You got your phone out a few times to
like,
do it.
I think, well, I actually did Google it because I was like, I think she might be an actual real child psychologist. Maybe that's my naivety of getting drawn into a show, but I was like she was so good. And then the fact these are one takes, so they're doing like an hour of dialogue multiple times until they say, all right, we'll do that one.
And I think that one was on take 4.
Yeah.
They were able to
so.
get everything on take 4. And this is the other thing about the show is that this is this kid's very first time being on TV.
Oh yeah,
Like he's
the
actor, the teenager.
Yep.
Like he's never done any other show, and that we know
Yeah,
of.
casting
obviously.
went through 500 boys and
Yes.
said, we'll take that one.
Yep.
And we want to give him an opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's his first time. And
He's obviously a natural.
knocked out.
Knocked it out of the park for sure. But yeah, episode 3 with the counselor was heavy.
I liked it, from, some of the interview type jobs I've had in the Air Force, as well as obviously as a criminal investigator.
Right.
Which again, as I mentioned these titles, like I do not claim at all to be some like subject matter expert or like,
It's just our experiences in life.
yeah, experiences, but all that to say, like, as a criminal investigator, whether in training or in real life, seeing her interview techniques was fascinating to me, whether it's, the proxemics that she was using as far as the posturing of her chair, that's something that we learned.
Yeah.
She starts across the table.
Yep.
Which
the
the
barrier.
table is considered a physical barrier in any type of interview or interrogation or investigation. And whether you're a boss and you're giving a performance review to a subordinate, if you're sitting behind the table and talking with them on the other side of the table, that's a physical barrier.
Yep.
And it lowers the anxiety and levels the playing field if you just swing your chair around to the side of the desk. And so in this interview, she starts out with that barrier. And that's it's a posturing technique.
Yeah, she's like building rapport with him.
And she's leaning back,
Yeah.
but she's in a position of authority there or trying to assert that, I would argue. And then she gradually gets closer to him in an interview. She then slides around to the side of the table, which she takes the barrier away. And then at a certain point, now she's on the same side of the table as him. And in fact,
Tells him
pushes
to.
him away verbally and physically by saying basically slide over.
Yep.
And he slides over.
Yep.
And so which she does these at key points during the interview to remind him that he's not in charge.
Right.
Even though he thinks he's in charge.
Yeah.
Of him as a male and her as a female. There's a lot of that going on in the show. And so she's reminding him of her place in her authority as a adult.
Yep.
As well as, obviously her professional authority.
Yeah.
And so, she slides over on his side, and then that's when she kind of pulls out, the pages, and as the same thing you see in episode 1. He at a certain point in the interview, that's when he pulls out the evidence. It's kind of similar. Here's my evidence against you. Here's the texts.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this.
Well, and in that episode, he gets, obviously worked up and flustered and pretty much says, I did it.
Yeah.
And which she didn't.
Which that's really his real confession.
Correct.
Is with her.
Yes.
Which is also very ironic.
Yes.
It wasn't.
And she played it correct.
It was actually later with the child psychologist, which is like 13 months later.
Yeah. He'd been locked up for her. Yeah.
Which she pulls it out of him over time.
Right. Yeah. She doesn't ask, but throughout the the interview with her and her building rapport, multiple visits. Yeah.
It's not like you're a law enforcement authority and I'm going to talk to you pretty much one time. We're going to do one suspect interview pretty much and that's it.
And it was, he opened up when he was at a vulnerable, point in a sense. It wasn't like, I did it. It was like when he was, in a crisis, I guess, situation that, it kind of came out and then he freaks out and says, wait, no, that's not what I mean. It's not what but then at the end, when obviously he's taken that session is done, and it's their last session or whatever, and he freaks out because it's their last session. He also says, don't you dare tell the judge, anything that I said. And so, that was a hard, I think for me, that was the hardest episode.
Yeah, it was very, obviously very intense for a reason. He gets very, very physically confrontational with her multiple times. And, she does a good job of maintaining her bearing and control of that, not only just the scene, but like if that was real life, like she maintained control very well. And even just like the little things about, she's using just basic interviewer techniques with, rapport building with, bringing him his favorite drink of hot chocolate at the beginning. It's like, the stereotypical thing you see on a cop TV show. Sure. I want to bring this guy a cup of coffee. Yeah. I'm going to bring him like a donut. Like, hey man, anything? You're building rapport. Yeah. But then like, she also leverages it against him by like, she forgets to bring it back.
The second time.
And then there's the sandwich.
Yeah.
Which the sandwich is interesting. I feel like there's some symbolism there as
for
well.
Sure.
But it's interesting to see him also wrestle with the reality of what he's done more at that point with her, because he's like, what do you mean you said she's dead? She's like, because she is. So that was powerful. Because again, I feel like in that moment, again, he's still trying to justify he's wrestling with his own morality, he's wrestling with his own guilt of like, how do I distance myself from this so I don't have to carry this on me? Yeah. And I can say that like, maybe because he says, I didn't intend to, I didn't mean to. He's assuming some of the responsibility, but he's not fully owning it. Right. And so, he didn't mean for, excuse me. He says he didn't mean for any of that to happen or whatever. But then he's kind of coming to terms with, okay, she did die, and what if I am responsible for that? Which most, the grand majority of maybe moral beings would have hopefully identified that much earlier on than like 13 months later. Yeah. Of recognizing the repercussions of their actions. But again, when you have someone there's so much going on psychologically and below the surface. Yeah, and that brain is not nearly fully developed. Also, valid point. You know what studies say? 13-year-old teenage boy. That like the adult male the brain's not fully developed until like the age of 25 or something like that. So, it's interesting to wrestle with that and like ask her like, well, what do you mean she's dead? Why'd you say it like that? He's defensive about it. Right. And also like, you can tell there's something off as well, where she's asking him questions about, hey, what do you consider normal for a 13-year-old boy sexually with a girl? What, she starts out like small, like, well, would you like to date a girl? Would you like to be with a girl? Yeah. What would you do? What would you do on your first date? What would you think would be appropriate? Yeah. And as a parent, you're like, man, this kid at the age of 13 is saying this, and this will be appropriate. And I'm like,
Red flag, red flag, red flag everywhere.
Yeah, you know, and it's like, these are like, again, okay, this kid's 13. We need to be having these conversations way earlier. Let's have the birds and the bees and sex talk way earlier. And then also like, it's not the age that it seemed appropriate when I was a kid is maybe no longer the age these days because like technology and everything is so much more accessible. Kids are finding out way earlier and they're telling their peers.
Yep.
And so that's something we're aware of as parents and we're trying to be more aware of. Is like, we need to open up these tough conversations much earlier than we're going to be ready for and when they're going to be ready for.
Yeah.
And it's not just a one-time conversation.
No.
It's a recurring conversation.
Yeah.
So, you know, so there was that, that stuck out to me. What else in the interview? There's a lot there in the interview.
There was a lot. I mean, I think we hit the main things. Obviously, we can't go through every detail because I don't remember all the details, but there was a lot there, and she did a really good job from, you know, the professional side of things. And I'd be interested to hear from my psychology people that I know that are, you know, friends or previous mentors and, you know, professionals, what they think how she did, because it is very interesting from, you know, somebody that's, you know, not in that profession to see that and be like, but to know people that are in that profession, be like, wow, shit, that's, you know, I mean, you know, you said it from your side of, you know, interviews that you've done before, that she did a really good job. But I would be interested, specifically people that have worked with kids before.
Yeah,
like,
it's a whole different interview.
Psychologists that have worked with kids before in a potentially similar, you know, situation, which hopefully there's not a lot out there. But
I think too, you know, also from a law enforcement perspective, just for anyone who's wondering, the whole incel culture is unfortunately a very real thing. And, you know, we do talk about that, and I have seen, you know, things come out in the course of law enforcement conversations, investigations, and all that. Like, you know, there are ongoing cases certainly still out there of people who believe that and are interested in acting out in violence based on what they feel they've been personally slighted on, that they feel like they deserve something sexual from women, and they feel like they're not getting it. And so they feel like they're going to act out, which obviously in so many different multiple ways is completely skewed point of view. But it's just something to be aware of, not only as a parent, well, especially as a parent, but like, you know, it just goes back to opening the door to like talking about hard topics and uncomfortable topics like sex, and with my son, making sure he understands, like, look, dude, like, you're not owed anything, little bro. Like, you're not. And like having that conversation and him understanding, like, what you know, what no means no means, like what boundaries are, like respecting women, and making sure he understands, like, he's not owed anything, especially not sexually, especially not crossing any physical boundary with any person, regardless of gender or anything. Like, there's a line. You know, you could even say, like, the kids are tickling each other, or they're fighting each other, or I'm tickling them, and if they're like, I'm done, I'm out, like, I'm done. That's it. Like, it's not like, well, let me just get one more jab. It's like, no, like, they put up a physical boundary. They're tired, or they're uncomfortable, or, you know, daddy roughed house too hard, and they're tapped. You know, that's not a one more. You know, so in being attuned to those nonverbals as well as those verbals. Whether it's in any just relationship, not even a sexual relationship. Right. But having those conversations with your boys, but then also obviously, especially having those conversations with your daughters. And making sure they know that they, you know, are not required to give anything. And their no most definitely means no. And having those conversations. So, and that is kind of scary. You know, obviously any parent should be concerned about that.
Oh, yes.
If you're not, like, you're blind.
So
I agree. So I think that's enough about that episode. There's so much there.
I know.
One more thing is there's the kind of, let's talk briefly about the kind of creepy guy that like lurks in the background.
Gosh.
So there's a law enforcement official that's basically works in the security room at this juvenile detention center. And he just always is lurking over her shoulder and being a little bit of a super creep. And I'm watching this and I'm like, this dude's off. Like, what's his deal? And it's like, there's something going on like with him mentally too. And so for me, I kind of see that as like, it's almost like he's the future adult version of this 13-year-old kid.
Yeah. When you said that, because I was really confused. I was like, why is this officer so weird and creepy, you know, body language and all of that. And when you said that and I paid attention, and I was like, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Like maybe he's not a predator, maybe he hasn't hurt anybody.
Right.
But like
there's something off.
He's like, 3 fries away from,
Yeah. Yep.
From McDonald's Happy Meal, he's just right there. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that was just something else I noticed. So the last episode.
Yeah.
This one was fascinating to me because now we're talking about the family. And it's like, we've waited this whole entire time. And even I told you at the beginning, I stereotyped the entire thing in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, oh, this Steven guy, I can't remember his last name, but this actor, the British actor that plays the dad.
Yeah.
Great actor. Really.
Something Miller.
Stephen Miller, maybe?
No, Steven is his real name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's Miller's the
dad, the last name of the family, yeah.
But really enjoy his work. Anyways, I was like, I didn't know he had tattoos before on his arm.
Oh, yeah.
But he actually does in real life.
Yeah.
And then I feel like the last movie I saw him in, he wasn't as bulked up.
Right.
And so I told you, I was like, oh, look, he's got a tattoo and he's bulked up. So he's going to play like the stereotypical, aggro, like machismo dad,
Alpha male.
Alpha male. And he's going to be, somewhat of like a little bit of an aggressor to the kid. And it turns out like that's really not really the case.
At all.
He's very like loving and affectionate with the wife and with the daughter and like.
And his son says that, during the interview with the psychologist,
Why do you keep bringing up my dad? Why do you keep digging on my dad?
Yeah. He's very protective of his dad, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And one of the few insights that the son gives you in episode 3, that you then see the father's side of that in episode 4, is the kid mentions when he was playing soccer, and the kid mentions that he was playing soccer and maybe wasn't the best out on the field. Yeah, in the UK, football. Yeah, or in
everywhere
Brazil, in
else
football.
in the world except America.
So she's on a football pitch, right? And so his dad's on the sidelines. Well, he's like, he's not doing well, and so
he's the goalie and he misses.
But you don't know he's the goalie at first.
Oh, okay,
In episode 3 with the psych interview, he's just talking about he wasn't playing well, and he looks over his dad off the pitch for validation, and they're like, you still got me? Are you still there? Like, am I still loved? Am I still, are you cheering me on with your eyes or with your body language? And like he said his dad looks away. He doesn't use the word shame, but he says he looks away.
Yeah.
And he recognized his dad did not want to make eye contact with him, and he says it crushed him.
Yeah.
And so it's very, very subtle.
And that the other dads were like laughing at him.
He doesn't mention that until episode 4.
Oh,
the father
that's right,
says
that's
that.
right, that's right.
So
that's right.
all you get is
the other perspective.
All you get is the son's perspective.
Yes.
I'm on the field. I'm sucking it up right now. I'm looking out for my dad. There's my dad. He looks away.
Yeah.
And then I feel mortified. Mm-hmm. And so what he's talking about there is he feels shame from his father rather than that validation, that reassurance. And it's so subtle, I feel like, and you just miss it. But then you don't miss it because the dad mentions it in episode 4. He tells his wife about, well, we put him in, we tried this and we put him in this to toughen up. We put him in this and we put him in soccer, but I wasn't so great. And then we put him in the goal, and then he wasn't super great as a goalie. And then,
that's right.
All the dads were laughing at him on the sidelines, and then I was just, I couldn't look at him. I just didn't want him to see my eyes. And it's subtle there, but like, as a dad, that is an alarm bell for me of like, man, you cannot miss these moments with your kids. That like, they are dialed in and watching you 24/7.
What's like those videos that you see, reels or whatever, that, when it's something like, and it's usually the ones that I've seen, at least, it's usually like, either a teenager or a really small child, where they're like about to do something, whether they're performing, doing a recital, or I saw one, I don't know, it's been a while just because I've been off social media, but I saw one a while back, and it was this baby, and he was in a swimming lesson, and I mean, younger than Victor, so maybe like a 2-year-old, toddler, right? And kind of head looking everywhere, and then makes eye contact with dad. I believe it's dad, and then just goes for it. And it's really interesting because I mean, it can be from itty bitty. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily have to be a teenager.
Yeah.
Kids are very much in tune with that.
Yeah. But as parents, I feel like we have equal responsibility, mom and dad, because, Liberty's watching me, she's watching you. But like, there's just, arguably, there's a little something about dads, in my opinion, that like we have a responsibility to it's that
authority figure, right? Not that moms aren't.
Not at all.
That's not what I'm trying to say.
Not at all, yeah.
But there is a level of authority when dad steps in.
Yeah, when we show
and
up.
that security.
Yeah.
I mean, and there have been times where Liberty has mentioned, Mommy, I feel more safe when Daddy is home,
Oh, wow.
And it's like, girl, me too. Me too.
Yeah. But it's like, I definitely, maybe it's not so much that like, well, the father has like a role. That's not really what I'm trying to say. I guess what I'm really trying to say is Dan, have a bigger burden myself. I feel like, to ensure that I try not to miss those moments. Because that's something I was carrying in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
I've posted about on Facebook and stuff before about like, I don't want to be an absent dad to my kids. And that's not just, I'm not like, there's so many ways of being absent.
Oh yeah.
We'll talk about that in another podcast. But the reality is like, I'm not talking about just physically when I'm at work,
Right.
Hour and a half commute on both ends and 8+ hour day, and you're working a 12-hour day. I'm not talking about that in multiple shifts, changing all the time. I'm talking about, that's a big factor.
Right.
But what can I control? What I can control is when I'm home, am I, emotionally present?
Yeah.
Am I, certainly spiritually present, but am I socially present? Am I emotionally present? I can be physically present. I can sit my butt in the room, on my computer, watching some on TV, just sitting there in my nothing box, but these kids are revolving around you. Hey, Daddy, even just tonight after dinner, having Victor step on my feet and walk him around the kitchen, and then Liberty from the room, Daddy, do that to me, do that to me. So she comes over, okay, everybody take a turn, on the Daddy Jungle Gym.
Yeah.
And so we do that for a little bit, but it's like, if I miss that moment, one time, like, it's probably not a big deal.
Right.
But like, you compound that over multiple days, multiple years, now you're driving and affecting a kid's childhood and developmental growth.
Yeah,
I would argue.
And they're going to end up saying, well, I'm not going to go to Dad anymore because every time I've asked, then, he doesn't have time, or he's too busy.
Correct.
Or, he's on a phone call, or, whatever the case is.
You keep failing to show up, or you fail to show up at significant moments for them that you may not even realize is significant, but to them is significant. Like this kid's soccer game was significant to him. That's one thing he mentioned, but he mentioned enough that it was significant.
Yeah.
And he's not mentioning it to say it was justification for killing someone.
Right. Oh,
and no one's trying to say that the red flags in the film are justification for a murder. But what we're saying is like,
over time,
all these things compound and all these things play a role. And it's a complex thing, and everyone ultimately is responsible. School system, social media, internet, parents, community, government, like that's what these screenwriters are trying to portray and show you. But that's one thing I noticed out of that scene, and that the father talks about is like, I missed that moment, and I feel shame because I didn't show up. Yeah. In that moment, I was physically present, but I didn't connect. Yeah. And then I didn't stand up for my kid when those fathers are ridiculing him.
Yeah.
It's tough. What else? So obviously he goes to school, or he goes to. It's interesting because it's his father's birthday, and they're trying to put their life back together, right?
Mom, dad, and sister.
Yep. Mom, dad, sister. everything seems to be going fine at home. And he goes out there, spray paint on the van. And then it's like the day starts going downhill. But the dad, being a typical fix-it dad, is like, we're going to fix this. Hey, we'll go to Waitrose. We'll go, pick up some paint. We'll knock this out. We'll go to the pictures. We'll go see a movie. We'll go get some takeout. We'll be all right.
Yeah.
And then he goes, and what unfortunately happens is he goes to the hardware store, and then he gets recognized, because other people have seen him on the internet, and they connect the dots, and then reality pulls him back down, and then everything falls apart, as we know, in the parking lot.
Yep.
And then they go home, and on the way home, his son calls him from the juvenile detention center, and finally
to wish him happy birthday, to ask him if he got his card, which is interesting because the card is a hand-drawn picture of his dad's face in the card.
Yeah.
And so his dad also brings that up later, that, he was a good artist, and he would sit on the kitchen table for hours and draw. He was never into sports. He was never into extracurricular activity, but he was very much into art.
Yeah.
And his dad kind of briefly mentions into, almost like, if you can read between the lines, it's almost as if his dad is like, I wish I would have focused more on those gifts, his gift of, art.
That's a tough one.
And not focusing so much on, let's try this, let's try that. Well, we wanted to try this because we wanted him to be, stronger. We wanted him to be able to protect himself and all of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's hard because, we want to follow whatever our kids are interested in, and we also want to give them avenues to spark their creativity. And, you have to be in that moment and follow them through each of those hoops, wherever they're going, and be flexible for that. But at the same time, like, if you see something that they're focusing on, like, try to be there in the moment with them, and and it's hard because I may have been really, I also did art 4 years in high school, but for me to sit down now as a 38-year-old man with a full-time job and other responsibilities and other things that I would like to do with my time, like, really honestly, like, I'd like to introvert when I come home from work and just read a book, or work some things out on my computer, but like, to sit down and be intentional, even just for a few minutes, and draw or color, with my daughter or whatever, like, that means the world to her. But it's very hard for me now. Whereas if I was in high school, I'd be like, let's go, let's do it, but like, that's what she's into. Yeah. And so I had to be present for that. But yeah, so he is a couple of things too on the way home. He calls him, collect a call from the jail, and he also did not expect that the mother and sister were on speakerphone in the car. And that's kind of another indicator of, like, he's leaning into his dad there and really just wanted a private conversation with his dad. But then, not no offense here, but like, I feel like the mother oversteps a little bit there.
I would agree.
And maybe jumps on the phone.
I would agree.
When it's on speaker, so they're listening, they're quiet, but they chime in.
Well,
how are you, son?
Well, and it happens because he then tells his dad that he's gonna change his plea. Yeah. And his dad is kind of like, it kind of clicks, like, okay, he finally said it. Yeah. After all this time.
Confesses,
he ultimately confesses. And so dad's kind of, in shock, and he gets emotional, whatever. And I think mom steps in because
there's a lull in the conversation. She wants to pick it up.
Well, no, I think she steps in because she's like, well, he's been quiet for a really long time. Somebody's got to say something.
Unless, again, the son only expected Dad was on the phone.
Correct.
The son's not waiting for anyone else.
And I think he did say, Dad, you're still there?
Right. He's not waiting for anyone else,
steps in.
But his dad on the phone.
That's hard.
So to me, I feel like the mother overstepped a little bit because she wanted to come in and nurture him. Because again, she's like, he's confessing here. Yeah. Not only what does this mean for him now, taking the guilty plea, but then what does this mean for us? That means, like, it's done. He's not coming home. So, no dig against moms.
Right.
But, like, I got out of that scene, he was expecting it to be a private conversation with his dad. And then while his dad was obviously processing, then the mother kind of steps in and yeah, it's me and your sister here. And then you hear the son go like, oh, I just thought it was me and dad here.
Dad, yeah. And part of me wonders if dad, when he answered the phone, if his dad would have said, it's, I'm here with your mom and sister, if he would have confessed, if he would have said, you know what I mean? Like, point. I mean, I don't know. Probably not, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. And that's another way to do it. Like, that's hard when a speakerphone. And there's been times, I try to be careful about that. Like, if I'm in the car and and we're in the van, whatever, and I call someone on speakerphone, I tell them, hey, man, just so you know, you're on speakerphone. Because guys talk.
Yeah.
Also, I got,
and you've done that with me.
young kids in the back. Like, I don't need to be talking bro talk.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
Language or whatever the
and
case.
you've called me before, and have told me, hey, can I not be on speakerphone? Because I need, if the kids are running around, or if I'm near, if I'm somewhere and there's other people around or whatever, if it, you've had to share some, tough stuff with me. So, I do appreciate when you do that, because, it kind of gives the person that warning sign, but also, the respect. So they also know in case they do want to share something. Yeah.
But it just speaks to the privacy and boundary in that conversation. But I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
That, I do wonder if, the mother was, I don't know, who knows if there was like some mother at home or whatever. Sure. I don't know. But like, it was just an interesting moment for me, because I was like, wait, this is the moment between the dad and the son right now. And then it's like, wait, just wait.
I know.
And then she pops up and it's like, oh no.
Yeah.
But it ended up working out okay. Sure. And they talked it out, whatever. But then they get home, you just see, like, as soon as he puts the car in park, like, the dad is just crestfallen and crushed. Yeah. And then he, tells him, like, get out the right side, whatever, like, I'll be inside. And he grabs his stuff and goes inside.
Yeah.
And, so they talk, whatever, and he goes up in the room. And then ultimately the most important scenes that you take away from that episode, in my opinion, are you got the father and the mother in their bedroom that have a serious conversation about
where did we go wrong?
Where did we go wrong? And I think every parent at some point probably has a similar conversation.
Yeah.
Through the journey of a kid's life. Kid makes a mistake, kid does something. Again, God forbid we're going to talk about murder here or something serious, but like, a kid trips up and makes a mistake or something, the parents are always going to be questioning themselves. And this is a conversation I have with my parents too, of like, I think parental guilt. I think it's something that we just carry. Yeah. We want to do right by our parents, and we want to do better for the next generation. And we inadvertently carry some guilt. And I think a small amount of that is a healthy thing. And I think by the mother being wise to mention that to him and support him through his processing. I liked one of the things she said in their intimate conversation. And one of the things she said was, I think it's okay for us to accept and admit that maybe we could have done better. And to me, that's like, wow. Like,
yeah, that was really vulnerable. And, she says that after they talk about his room, and everything that is in his room. And, she mentions, there were so many times that, I'd wake up at, 2-3 o'clock in the morning and his light would be on. And he was,
school night. Hey,
man, school night.
Wrap it up.
Yeah, and he's, in the computer playing games or on his phone.
Or social media.
Or whatever the case is. And she tries to talk to him and he's, turns the lights off and never says anything and, keeps, doing whatever it is that, he's doing. And, and so that as I remember that comment that she makes to him, I think it's okay for us to, try to have been, done a little bit more. It comes after that because I think they realize like, we gave them everything.
Yeah.
And I think that,
I mean, in a good way.
With good intentions. Yeah. But weren't so in tune. And that's the thing, he even makes a comment of, it's just how teenagers are these days, and, yeah.
Yeah. And that part was hard because it's like, I feel like I've heard that being said in other aspects of society.
Yeah.
But to see it on this show and someone saying it and recognize it, admit, that's a Gen Z, that's a Gen Alpha, that's, you know, the borderline of millennials. Like, that's just like who we are. Like, you want to talk about generations, like one of the maybe advantages of being millennial is like, we both grew up in the area of like pre-internet and then pre-cell phones and then post-cell phones. So we're in this, the benefit is like we've seen both sides.
Yep.
But the danger or the frustration is like we're in this weird twisted dilemma all the time because we're like, I hate this thing, but like it's a really good convenience.
Yeah.
Because like for me, that's how it is like, you know, social media is a love-hate relationship with me. Cell phones, love-hate relationship with me. And it's like internet, but then it's like how much time can be sucked through the internet? And then like all the things you can find on there, you know, good and bad. And it's like, sometimes I wish, you know, we didn't have all that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like this book Margin that I'm in the middle of reading right now. One of the things that he says in that book is like, for every solution to a problem, there ends up being another problem. And it's like, that's kind of the internet and that's social media. Social media was designed, you know, with good intentions and with good purpose. And it's not evil, it's not bad. And same thing with the internet, but it's just like with that opens up a whole new Pandora's box of issues.
Yeah.
And it's like,
it reminds me of like, you know, when they have these commercials for like medications. It's like, take this medication for this. However, the side effects, you know?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. And so, do you want to take care of this thing? Just be aware that you're going to have all these other issues.
Yeah.
So every time you try to take care of, you know, there's going to be, you know, an array of other issues.
But like, obviously Gen Z and like Gen Alpha, like they grew up only knowing this.
I know. It's
and this
wild.
is something that I think about with them. Cause I mean, I guess they're like Gen Alpha or something like that. Technically they're on the, I don't know.
Gen W, I don't, something.
Gen Zebra, who knows? But, they not only will they grow up not knowing anything other than screens and technology, they unfortunately will also grow up always seeing a phone in both of our hands. And that's something I'm trying to be more cognizant aware of, is like, what are they learning about what's acceptable with technology by our use of technology?
Yeah.
Because every time they see us, like here's Barbie and Ken with their proverbial accessories like stuck in their hand all the time, you know, and it's never like removed from them or within arm's length. And so,
and it's, you know, as
what are we doing to better discipline ourselves and put boundaries up so that they understand this is not technically normal.
Right.
This is not the way it's really meant to be or how it maybe should be.
Yeah.
It's a tool.
Yeah.
Let's not make it like a mandatory accessory.
Right. Well, you know, and it's not...
Or a part of our body, rather.
Yeah, or a part of our body, yeah. Extension of our hand.
Yeah.
Or our brain, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's interesting because we don't hate screens.
No.
And we have a love and hate relationship with screens. But we've definitely cut so much back on screens.
Yeah.
For us, because time... but especially for the kids. And that was about almost a year ago where I kind of we went cold turkey. It was right before summer ended last year. We went cold turkey and I said, I'm just going to try it out. And with screens once a week. And that sounds wild for a lot of people. And I want to say the first 2-3 weeks was really hard for them.
Yeah.
And for me too, because let's be honest, you know, usually sometimes just like, well, let me just turn it on so I can cook dinner. Let me just turn it on so I can get a break.
So convenient.
It's so convenient. It's an easy babysitter, right? But we were seeing a lot of behavior stuff with them after, you know, and it wasn't like they were sitting down and watching TV for hours. Sometimes it was just like a 20-minute, 30-minute thing max. But for them, they don't have tablets, which for kids their age, that's kind of not normal.
Right.
When we go on long trips, people usually ask, well, you know, do you give them the tablet then? And we don't travel with tablets, so that's kind of different. I've had multiple people ask me, like, what do you do? and we talk.
We give them an abacus. They're back there like,
yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are times where it is hard. You know, they're fussy, they're crying,
Yeah.
they're, you know.
oh yeah,
But we do try to, you know.
pull this car over right now.
Yeah. We do try, obviously, to plan our trips around, you know, times where they will, you know, take a nap or whatever. But we just try to be creative with, you know, books and coloring and busy stuff. You know, they have, you know, usually when we travel long distance, which we haven't done in a while, but you know, they'll pack like a basket and they can take, you know,
Yeah, a couple toys.
You know, things that they can get from their rooms or whatever that will keep them busy.
Books,
but
art, whatever.
they don't know any different because we have never done the tablet in the car, especially.
Yeah. Sorry, but thank God on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, so they don't know any different. We never had like an extra tablet around the house that we were like, oh, here. I think you had a fire,
We
and
have
then
one
a
somewhere.
friend.
Honestly, I don't even know where it is.
Yeah, it's in a cabinet somewhere. But we were gifted one before we left on our trip. Move here.
Oh yeah.
From one of our friends back in Oklahoma, and we've used it, you know, very few times for educational purposes.
That's true.
And so, but yeah, the screens, I think, for us have made a huge difference in cutting that, especially behavioral wise. And, you know, some people might be asking, well, what do you do now with the time that you no longer have your kids, you know, in front of screens?
And we'll still do
so
movies.
much.
We'll still do movie nights.
Yeah,
you know,
of course.
Popcorn, watch a movie.
Yeah,
it's
of
not
course.
Like we don't ever do TV or movies.
Right.
But
Yeah, absolutely.
we try to be, like you said, more intentional with our time.
Yeah, definitely more intentional. And it's
And we
funny
try
because
not to babysit with the TV.
correct. And it's funny because, you know, sometimes, especially in the winter months that we've had, which I felt like, you know, lasted for a whole year, emotionally and physically and all the things. But we, you know, there have been times where Liberty's like, well, I'm bored, you know, and before with TV, I used to be like, oh my gosh, I need to entertain her. Like, you know, I need to entertain her, you know, whatever. Whereas so now, huge, you know, man. I've, you know, huge. I feel like God has given me a little bit of wisdom, and I've used wow, I wonder what you're going to do now with your, like, I wonder what your brain is going to come up with now that you're bored.
Yeah, I really like that.
And not too long ago.
You're putting it back on her. Like, ultimately, that's not my responsibility.
No.
Your boredom is your responsibility.
Which is good. It's really good for kids to be bored.
It's creating resilience.
Correct.
Is what that is.
And it's funny because not too long ago, she said that, and it's just funny because she's like, I already know what you're going to say, Mama. And so, you know, I let her tell me what I was going to say, and that's exactly what she said. I wonder what you're going to do with your boredom. And so she went out to the garage and, you know, grabbed a few boxes and made like this, you know, castle thing with these you know, Amazon or whatever boxes we had out there. And then we said, oh, look, bored became, you know, Bob the cat, you know, whatever it was that she created. And, you know, her brain was like, oh my gosh. You know, and so it's been neat to see all the things that they've been able to do. And then more intentional time that they have been able to have with each other as siblings. Yeah, that's
very true.
I mean, they are siblings, you know, there's a lot of, you know, little bickering and fighting, whatever normal sibling stuff
play
too.
Really well together.
But they play really well together.
Yeah. And yeah, that's a good point. What you said about, you know, I wonder what you're going to find to do. And that's so great because like it turns them back around on them so quick, and it's like I'm not responsible for that.
Right.
And as a child, like, you got to learn how to occupy your time, and especially, you know, again, like going back to this current book Margin I'm reading right now, like we are so inundated with our time, with screens, with technology and everything, and it's just so much sensory overload all the time. That, man, just waiting for the microwave for 30 seconds is like, you know, minor anxiety. Or riding in an elevator and like sitting there, like for me anyway, like sitting there with like three people and it's just like ding.
Which that's so funny because I'm like, I want to talk to these people. I want to know where they're from. I want to know their life story. Which if we are ever in an elevator with Liberty, which every time we are anywhere with Liberty,
oh my goodness.
She'll usually strike a conversation with anyone and anything. I mean, the last time we were in an elevator.
At most, I might give him a nod.
The last time we were in an elevator was when we went to watch a hockey game. And And
I love your dress. I love your hat. Yeah.
Yep. It's exactly what she said.
Super genuine, super nice. Yeah.
Yeah, she is. And it's been interesting because I've had to like have conversations with her, like, you know, not everybody's kind, not everybody's nice, not everyone's your friend. And it's hard because, you know, from a kid's perspective, it's like, what do you mean? Like, so I'm complimenting them on something, you know, so it's been interesting to kind of walk through that with her.
But like just the waiting, like just, you know, it's so hard for us in today's society just to wait for 5 minutes. Like just sit in silence with yourself and your own thoughts for like, try to do that. Like 5, 10, 30 minutes, like it's deafening, and it is a discipline because you're almost like weaning yourself off from it. It's almost like it's really a detox is what it is. And you're having to re-engage with your own inner creativity again. And so by hopefully teaching her that early and young, then that becomes a self-discipline and a pattern that then she's able to carry when she gets older. And then when we slowly start introducing more technology, it becomes like, I don't necessarily need that. I can still take care of my own boredom and not just be like, Mommy, I'm bored. You know, it's just like, all right, come on, dude. Like, just be patient.
Go outside.
Just wait. Like, go, you know.
And, you know, obviously technology is going to have to be introduced to them because that's the world that they live in. Like technology is the future. That's just the reality. And so, you know, we're not like, we're never going to bring it up. They're never going to have, you know, that's not it at all. There's just, I think, age appropriate. I think there's a time and I think there's a season and all of that. And obviously we're on the same page with that. But yeah.
So yeah, that's we kind of went off tangent.
I know
in a good way. Talking about some important things. But yeah, that's the majority of episode 4. Really enjoyed that episode. It was very heavy. Obviously, the ending. You know, he personifies his child through his child, his teddy bear on the bed, and you know, hugs him and kisses him as he's crying, and you know, apologizes to the bear, visualizing his son there, and saying, "I'm sorry."
That was so hard.
I should have done more. And it just ends. It leaves you with that. Like, that's it. And then roll credits, and you're like, no. You know?
I know.
But I like that, and I love that because you got to wrestle with that. And that's real life. And it's like, what do we do with that as a society? What do we do with this film and say, as parents, what can I do? What's my takeaway? And you got to humble yourself. Like, yeah, there's people that are like, oh, I didn't get anything out of it. Or, oh, it was just about the one take and blah, blah. Good, you know, hope they get their BAFTA or Oscar or whatever, Whatever. But like, every parent, if they're cognizant and they're intentional and they feel like watching the show and devoting 4 hours to it, then if they're present in the moment, I think every parent can take something away from it. I think every school teacher can take something away from it. I think anyone who deals with kids in an educational or parental or leadership capacity can take something away from it, especially in a government capacity of like, are there things we can do different? Are there things we can do better? You know, what's a safe age for cell phones, for social media, for technology? And like, really, I love that the director's point of making this show is really to spark tough conversations. Yeah. And that's really what kind of our podcast is all about too, is hopefully to spark tough conversations. Yeah. And really, like, what are we not talking about? And this is obviously an issue that has been slowly growing in society, and now finally someone, kind of like the 13 Reasons Why, like someone finally made a show, and then now it's going viral because people are like, yeah, we should be talking about this more. Like, it's not so much just about the violence or just about like the incel thing. You know, there's so much more there. Oh yeah, that just happened to be
part of the story. Yep.
But the fact that it didn't just blame the parents, it didn't just blame the school system, it didn't just blame like, you know, the peers.
Everyone plays a role.
Everyone has a role, and so I thought it was a great show, hard show, tough show.
So hard.
But a lot to unpack and take away. And I told Natalia, I was like, man, I feel like I'm going to be talking about this show for like 6 months. Yeah. Just because there's a lot there to process in a good way. Like we need to. Yeah. But yeah, I think we might actually be over an hour at this point. I had my clock going, but I busted 45 minutes a while back. I think we're probably like about an hour and a half. I'm just guessing because I stopped my watch. Sure. But we do want to wrap it up. But sorry, still getting over this chest infection. But yeah, that's those are the topics we want to just talk about today. But we appreciate you guys going on this journey with us. Yeah. and having conversations. Welcome to our home. Welcome to our library.
Yep.
And we look forward to doing more of them.
Yeah.
And we appreciate feedback as well.
Yeah. I'm going to try it out and see.
Yeah.
Have people come into our library space and have conversations.
Yeah.
Have good, tough, but important conversations.
And hopefully spark more conversations
Yeah.
from it. So
Yeah.
look forward to the next one.
Yep. Love you.